Hello and welcome to the first episode of Gender Matters with me, Elizabeth Hobson, and Mike Buchanan from Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. Mike and I spend a lot of time coordinating activism and lobbying for the rights and well-being of men and boys, often behind closed doors. And in our work, we're lucky enough to form relationships with vanguard members of the men's human rights movement, as well as members of the growing heterodox non-feminist demographic within the academy, grassroots organisers, and dissenters in the wider culture war. And we've decided to bring some of the conversations that we're having to you. We hope you'll find them as engaging as we do. A note before I introduce our first ever guest on the name of the series, which we did agonise over, because we know that gender is a loaded word. It's nebulous and non-specific, used commonly by social justice warriors, and suggestive of the idea that biological sex is insignificant, and that what makes a man or a woman or a non-binary donkeykin is a performance. However, let's be honest, Sex Matters sounds like a series Lacey Green would host, and besides, the Oxford Dictionary defines gender as either of the two sexes, so when we're talking about biological sex differences, the title won't be a misnomer, and especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones, which are topics that we'll be exploring with our guests in depth. So, I'm sorry if we've triggered anyone, but gender matters it is. Now, as soon as Mike proposed the idea to record these conversations, there was no question in either of our minds about who would make the perfect first guest to kick off the series. He's a man who needs no introduction because you've undoubtedly seen his name in the video title, and because he is a globally recognized men's advocate, a force of nature, and the undisputed modern father of the men's human rights movement. In 2009, he founded the largest, most influential and enduring website dedicated to changing the cultural narrative on men and women, opposing gynocentrism, and encouraging a greater and better range of life choices for men, avoiceformen.com. In 2014, he founded the International Conference on Men's Issues that brings together concerned men and women annually, and soon to be more often, to discuss issues critical to the nurturing of healthy societies. He coaches men and produces educational videos at An Ear for Men and paulelam.com. He has co-authored Say Goodbye to Crazy with Tara Parmatier and Red Pill Psychology, Psychology for Men in a Gynocentric World with Peter Wright. His latest book is called Men, Women, Relationships, Surviving the Plague of Modern Masculinity. It is, as Peter Wright suggested in his foreword, a red pill Bible. Without any further ado, it's my honour to introduce to you Paul Elam. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing great, Elizabeth. Thank you for that way too kind introduction. But I'm glad to be here with you and Mike.
Good. The essays in men-women relationships are really interesting. I'm so pleased to have it on my shelf, especially with us having growing boys in the house. And it's been a pleasure to reread over the last week or so. One essay I particularly enjoyed was 8 Laws Governing Men and Women, where you posit the idea that feminism is not for feminists, it's for governments and corporations. Would you talk a little about that for us, please?
Well, I subscribe to the old adage, follow the money. If you want to understand what's going on in the world, look at where the money goes. That is something that's been repeated time after time after time, and it's always been proven to be correct. What we see, for instance, look at modern advertising, much of which hinges on the idea that men are knuckle-dragging Neanderthal idiots who couldn't treat a headache, wouldn't know what to take were it not for the wisdom of their wives. This is a advertising technique employed because it's what sells. We live in a culture that loves to look and mock men, ridicule them. This has been part of the feminist diatribe for the last 50 years, and it pays off. It pays off too that women are wage earners. Feminism sold the idea to women that they could be anything that they want to be. And ostensibly, what a healthy message is that? You can be anything you want to be. You're not confined to just being a mother, as though that's somehow a diminished role in life, which it is certainly not. But that if you want to be an accountant or a fighter pilot or whatever, you can be that. Well, it's a great message, except for one thing. What happened with feminism was they doubled the tax base. Instead of one man working and supporting a family, you now have twice the amount of people earning wages and paying taxes. And what is the reality for most women? It is not that they're fighter pilots or brain surgeons. It is that they are shop-worn slaves in cubicles all across the world with bags under their eyes and children resenting them for not being at home and feeling guilty and struggling with their role in life. They promised women could be anything they want to be, but what they actually delivered was life in the middle. And of course, they've sold women on the idea that they're victims, and as long as they are victims, they will need a rescuer. That would be the state. And we've certainly done that. And again, all this goes down to money. These women are working for not great wages. They're paying taxes. They're obedient consumer units. They are everything that the feminist corporatocracy would like them to be. And they think that that's empowering them, even as we start to see now women being affected more by things like heart disease than they ever were before. They're starting to catch up to men on stress-related illnesses. This is women's empowerment in all about the money trail. And that's just a start. You can look at this throughout our educational system. You can look at everything that's going on in society relating to feminism, even acts like BAWA, 600 million, I think, or a billion a year, some ridiculous amount of money, most of it squandered. Most of it they can't even track. There has been no accountability with it. All these money are going to a small group of ideologues that are distributing it among themselves and doing quite well. Meanwhile, the children of female batterers are totally ignored because it's about the money. It's not about the victims. So you can take almost anything you have a contention with modern feminism and look at where the money surrounds it, and you'll find your answers.
Yeah, I was reading the suffragettes, Britain's forgotten terrorists, sorry. Is that Anthony Brown? Do you remember, Mike?
Not sure, Elizabeth.
Not sure. It's a very good book, but he was talking about why the Women's Social and Political Union ramped up their terrorist activities. And he showed that while there was a short truce with the state and their donations went rapidly down, while their membership actually grew. So their membership, there were ordinary-ish men and women contributing small amounts, but the big donors stopped giving so much, and then the more the violence ramped up, the more the big donors were given to them. And it got to the point where Christabel Pankhurst, the daughter of Emmeline Pankhurst, had run off to France and was living on like £10 a week or something at a time when other women working full-time jobs were lucky to get 2.
That sounds like feminism to me, from start to finish.
Paula, I'd like to come in here. Firstly, I'd like to echo the comments Elizabeth made earlier. We're honoured that you could join us for the first episode in what will hopefully be a long series of videos. You know,
Happy to be here.
You know what huge fans we are of your various series, including Regarding Men, which is just it's always a joy to me when I get an email saying there's a new episode, and I don't think I've missed one of them. Like Elizabeth, I greatly enjoyed your book, and I'd like to read out a couple of paragraphs from the chapter Elizabeth was referring to just now for our viewers. And the first is this: your fourth law governing men. Men will not complain collectively about anything that happens to them. This crucial law is particularly beneficial to achieving complete governmental and corporate control. Attacks and affronts to men as a group will not cause a collective reaction, ever. You can imprison men, beat them, steal their property, demonize their sons, psychologically destroy their children, relegate them to the streets, tax them and spend their money on other groups, and as a group, they will not react. Again, ever. Indeed, men will, in accordance with laws number 1 and 2, assist the state in the furtherance of such abuses, provided the dominant public perception is that it is done in the name of protecting women. End of first paragraph. Now, this could be a very discouraging message for men in general, Paul, and MRAs in particular. But I'd like to think that as the culture changes and ever more people understand the truth about gender politics in general and feminism in particular, so this particular law governing men will be adhered to by ever fewer men. And you end the chapter on an encouraging note with this. And now comes the red pill revolution. That would be us. We're a tiny but growing minority, even as the zombies living by the 8 laws are showing some signs of shrinkage. At the very least, they are finally getting exposed to a couple of things they don't much like: the truth and public humiliation. I'd call that a good place to start. I couldn't agree more with you, Paul. And I don't know if you want to say more on that, or shall I come on to my first question?
Well, I would just add to that what I'm saying there, I think will always hold true, that men collectively will not complain as a collective. It's not in our mentality. We're wired to be competitors with each other. So the idea that men are going to band together by the thousands and march on Washington over their rights issues, probably not going to happen. But the good news in that is that social change is never predicated on tens of thousands of people in the street. It always starts with a small group of very, very vocal, very informed individuals who press the truth against the grain. Men's rights was just as unpopular as freeing Black people in the antebellum South. That's the reaction to that was like, what do you mean free Black people? How crazy an idea is that? No different than today when a form of evil is set in place, then you're going to have that until somebody forces change. So while I don't see men collectively in mass doing this, I do think the time will come, and I think we're starting to witness it now, when enough people making noise will force change.
I agree. Okay, on to my first question. Paul, as MRAs, we're only too conscious about the failure of small c conservatives, and in the UK, big C conservatives too, by which I mean Conservative Party politicians and voters mainly. The failure of them to challenge feminists and stand up for the rights of men and boys. And of course, conservatives are as crippled by gynocentrism as liberals are, if not more so. As a party, we get a good deal of support from small c conservatives, among others, and I sense a growing awareness among religious people too, particularly Christians, that they share a lot of views in common with MRAs. Muslims and Jews tend to be disinclined to engage with us because of our position on the crime of male genital mutilation. We're starting to engage with Christians in the UK and planning to co-host a conference with them in the fairly near future. I wondered if you had any thoughts on the idea of MRAs working with religious people in particular on common goals.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. And what we see, unfortunately, even though I agree with you, it's a different paradigm we're dealing with Jews and Muslims. There are different issues at play there that have to be addressed with those issues in mind. We also have issues dealing with Christians. Many Christians follow the habit, the terrible habit of mutilating their infant children in the United States, as though that this is still being treated as some sort of covenant with God. So we have that, and you will get resistance from that. Also, there is a huge problem, at least in the United States. I can't speak to the UK, but I can tell you in the United States that there's a huge problem with gynocentrism in the churches. You have so many, even fundamentalist churches that see men as supposed leaders in the home, but you have the clergy standing there at the pulpit telling the men they better shut up and make their wives happy. Because guess what? If the wife doesn't want to come there and put money in the jar, it's over. So we have a lot of unfortunate intellectual cowardice by clergy in the United States, and they are selling out their families. I mean, one of the great, huge benefits to religion in the West is that it's pro-family. Is that the whole concept is modeled around two parents and children and family unity and family worship together and growth and development along those lines. Well, but if you're basically on your knees in the pulpit, convincing women that they're put upon and that they should be in charge, which is essentially what's being sold, then that presents a different set of problems. I've seen a few incidences, but they're isolated, where clergy doesn't feed into this narrative and where they really challenge women on gynocentrism, and they challenge men to be leaders in their families, patriarchs, for lack of a better word. But I still think that there is great opportunity for men's advocates to work with clergy. I really do, because the professed principles in Christianity are quite a bit in line with what we see from a lot of red pill thinking. And if we can educate clergy, and that's what I think the process is, it's not just let's join forces, but it's let's educate you first and then see where we can find common ground and where you might be able to help the members of your congregation actually preserve and protect their families. Because right now, so many of them are just urging men to live on their knees.
So are there any prominent clerics in the US that you think of as being, particularly bothered about men's issues or boys' issues?
Jesse Lee Peterson, Reverend Peterson, yes. And you can, for those who aren't familiar with Reverend Peterson, you can find his work on YouTube.
Is he the Reverend who's spoken at Trump rallies?
I believe he is. I don't recall ever seeing that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I recall seeing somebody interesting.
But that wouldn't surprise me at all. But he's very, very well versed in men's issues.
Okay.
And in feminism, and he's patently anti-feminist and encourages men to be leaders as part of what makes a Christian home.
Okay, we'll check out his work, Paul. Thanks for that.
Yeah, he's doing good work. He's interviewed me a couple of times for his program.
Oh, well, that's okay. If you could send us links to those, Paul, we'll put them along with this video.
Sure, absolutely.
Elizabeth, I think you have another question.
I do have another question. Yeah, I was just going to come back with, I think the critical word you mentioned, Paul, alongside the suggestion we should educate them, was the word courage, because, I think that in the conversations we've had with Philip Davies, he's talked about how, a lot of politicians, they're not completely blinkered and unknowing about men's issues. They just lack the courage to talk about them publicly. You know, he says that there are people across the benches who come up to him in private and say, you know, thanks for what you're doing. I agree with you. You're completely right. But they won't stand up, you know, in the main chamber and add their voice to the Hansard record. And I suspect the same thing is going on in the clergy.
I think so too. And to even address the point more to what Mike was saying in the beginning about small c and big C conservatives, I think the best thing that ever happened to the world politically was the rise of populism that is going on now. I was very happy to see Boris Johnson in the position that he's in. I think great things are going to come from that. But I think it takes populist politicians to start getting these issues on the map. Donald Trump was the first and only president in history to talk about the struggles that young men are facing with false accusations. I mean, it's a stunning thing to happen from an American president, for that to even be acknowledged. Because we get, generally what happens is on the left in America, we get killed by feminism. On the right, we get killed by chivalry. That's misguided. So they're on the same page. It's why VAWA keeps passing all the time, keeps getting refunded in a bipartisan way, because they're both on the same page. But now, since Trump, a populist, has been in office, Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, has gutted the Dear Colleague letter. They're going in and actually addressing men's issues as a part of the political platform. That's actually happening. And once, of course, you know, we understand with political trends that once the dam breaks on something, you can't put the bricks back in place again. That's happening. With another term, I think we're going to be in great shape. And I think Trump has also opened the door for a lot more populists to gain seats in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, governorships, all forms of government. And we're seeing this happen in Italy. It's happening in the UK. It's happening in America. And that gives me true hope politically that one day somebody like Donald Trump or one of his predecessors will say, we need to do something about family courts.
And we have in Spain, a rising party that is avowedly anti-feminist.
It's happening.
It is.
Whether the feminists want it to or not, it is happening. And I have to admit to a certain degree of schadenfreude at seeing the wailing and gnashing of teeth as the world they built is starting to tumble down.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, what's beautiful, like I'm a big fan of Trump. I call him the most pro-male POTUS I never thought I'd see. And, you know, it's not just, you know, appointing Betsy DeVos. He also has made a lot of really positive moves with regards to the criminal justice system that is seeing a lot of men not incarcerated or sentences reduced or being able to enter the workforce in a way that they couldn't have before, which is fantastic. So he's already doing some really amazing things. And yeah, you know, he has shifted the Overton window, and so things are going to keep progressing, I think. But also, yeah, what's beautiful is the fact that the likes of, you know, your Nancy Pelosi just seems to be helping him so much. It's really hilarious to watch.
I think it was you, Elizabeth, was telling me that someone caught film or footage of Pelosi experimenting with tearing the speech up.
What, she practiced that?
She practiced it, you know, while he was talking, I think, just to make sure
yeah,
it wasn't going to look silly.
She placed little starter tears so that, I mean, she got a little tear going so that she could bring it up later and make a beautifully demonstrative tear of the fakest bullshit I've seen in my life during a State of the Union address. And she is making our case for us. God bless her. I hope she stays prominent for a long time.
Right.
But not as Speaker of the House.
No.
So my next question is going back to men-women relationships and the essay Servant, Slave and Scapegoat, in which you suggest that not only are the historic archetypes, which you define as hero, villain, ruler, warrior, creator, sage, rebel and explorer, flawed because they defined what men were driven to be rather than what they wanted to be, but that they've actually been supplanted by new archetypes, the servant, slave and scapegoat, which clearly are not appealing prospects for men and not healthy roles to embody. I'd argue that this transition can be traced back to Eleanor of Aquitaine's proto-feminism and has become more established and then entrenched with the progressive waves of feminism, and that further this transition is built upon the human instinct to gynocentrism. But what really interests me is your suggestion that we should create a new story by changing the underlying mythology. Because I think that part of the reason that feminism is such a force is because the movement has entirely hijacked our collective accepted narratives on the relationships between men and women. So we have the facts on our side, but we're yet to capture the public imagination with a good yarn. So what is the story and how do we effectively disseminate it?
Well, I think one of the things to preface the answer to that is to understand that there was greatness in the old archetypes for humanity, for civilization, the warriors, the heroes, the kings, the creators that men are. But when you are driven blindly, for instance, to be a warrior, you can be exploited to be warrior for the wrong causes, which is that's the vulnerability in blind archetypes, in not having consciousness about what is driving you and what's making you who you are. So a woman says, oh, somebody offended me. And of course, you're going to rise up to the challenge to make sure no fair maiden is ever offended in your presence, which is what we see in feminist men now. And it looks pathetic on them. But the underlying story is that guess who the creator of these archetypes were? They were men. Archetypes aren't just something that base who we are. Who we are is also the basis for the archetypes. And it infers consciousness too. I love the warrior archetype. If people can't tell, it's part of my model for living. But it's a conscious archetype. And I suggest to all men, you write the narrative of your life. You become conscious of what archetypes are. Do you see a servant or a scapegoat? And what we find, especially in the red pill community, is many men who are very familiar with the role of scapegoat. They were scapegoated in family courts. They were scapegoated in their marriages. They've been scapegoated by their families. And that unfortunate reality has also driven them to having a much more open mind about a different narrative. That's why I think we see so many scapegoats in red pill life, is that the appeal of something newer and better was already built into that personality type. So with that, I just encourage men to reconsider everything you think about yourself, everything you think about the world, everything you thought about your family. And this doesn't mean to disown them or hate anybody, but just to reevaluate all of this. Who do you want to be? If you're a warrior and you see that as who you are, or a creator and you see that as who you are, then just be sure that you're consciously in control of what you're fighting or what you're creating. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, well, it's the opposite of suggesting that people disown each other or hate anybody, isn't it? It's about taking responsibility for your own role.
Absolutely.
And we had in yesterday's Sunday. We had in yesterday's Sunday Times an appalling, just an appalling piece, and just about the first. I think it was the first or second paragraph, Elizabeth, wasn't it? Where she basically said that MGTOWs were men who were striving for male supremacy. You know,
Sure,
because I mean, because walking off the plantation means you want to control the plantation. You know,
exactly right.
Just
Not playing
bizarre.
the game. Well, and MGTOW is a great example. I love telling people that there's no victims, just volunteers, that we're responsible for everything in our world. And MGTOW, to me, is an expression of that personal accountability. They're saying, game's rigged, I'm not playing. And of course, that makes him not available for exploitation, which means that in the minds of people like wrote the art, I didn't see the article you're talking about, but I've seen many like them. In that person's mind, a guy taking himself out of the path of exploitation is somehow an affront, and he needs to be demonized and criminalized. We just got through doing a discussion on the dangerous rise of men who won't date woke women.
Yes.
Lawrence Fox.
Lawrence Fox, yes.
Who is now being pilloried in the feminist media because he won't date feminists. It's the same phenomena. And of course, the woman who wrote about it for Refinery 29 made a direct connection between him and mass shooters. This is what they're doing. If you dare to say my life is my own, and I'm going to live it the way I want to live it instead of the way you want me to live it, then you must be characterized as pure evil. This is why whenever I'm asked, and I am asked regularly, Paul, you said some very strong provocative things over the years. Would you like to take any of that back? Hell no. There's nothing I have ever said or ever could say that even comes close to comparing the kind of evil that would tell a man, if you decide not to get married, you're no better than a mass shooter. I've never said anything that ridiculous or that evil. So I think I'll stick with what I've said.
Okay. Elizabeth?
Well, I was just going to say, someone asked me what my thoughts on MGTOW were recently. And, I said that I think that almost every man should go through at least a period of going his own way so that he can learn about himself and learn what his role is and what his needs are and what his boundaries are. I think that would be a really positive development. They wouldn't necessarily have to stay in MGTOW their entire life, but it might be helpful, to have that period of reflection before going into relationships with women.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
There's a transition in life from young adulthood to adulthood, which is where the real critical part of individuating comes in for all human beings, men and women, this point of becoming who you are as an adult. And I've often suggested to men and women in their late teens, early 20s, if they're leaving home, don't get a roommate. Figure out how to get your own place. Live alone. Learn to live alone and be comfortable in your own skin before you jump into a live-in relationship or even a roommate. That's an essential skill for living. And now this is what feminists hate the most. They want men available to slave away and surrender their resources to women. And even if you're talking about healthy acts of individuation for all human beings, I'm sure it's very empowering for women, and it's very evil if men do it. That seems to be the standard.
Okay.
It's hilarious how much it triggers feminists, actually, and they're strong, independent women, but as soon as the likes of Lawrence Fox says, well, I wouldn't date you, they absolutely hate it. I love that.
Okay. On to my second question, Paul. I'd like to turn to the issue of abortion, which to me is as much a men's issue as it is a women's issue. I think you know my views on the matter, which is that abortion is state-sanctioned murder of unborn children, financed mainly by the taxes of men, some of them prospective fathers who may not even have known of their partner's pregnancies when they had abortions. At the last conference in Chicago, I raised the issue of abortion in my talk and fully expected some people, notably some women, to walk out of the room. To my considerable surprise, my comments were met with some applause. Recently, Donald Trump became the first American president to attend the annual March for Life in Washington, D.C. Abortion is, to me, a very obvious area where we have common ground with major religions, not just Christianity. Feminists are keen on women having the power to kill their unborn children, while many anti-feminists aren't. I'd be interested to have your thoughts on the issue of abortion, and I know Elizabeth also has some very interesting perspectives.
Boy, we're going to jump in the deep end of the pool now, aren't we? Okay.
We are.
That's fine. I guess I should start with the bottom line, although this is, to me, an incredibly complex issue. I think it's fair to say that abortion is the state-sanctioned murder of a human life. That being said, I would not be one that would be prone to criminalize it. And that's mainly out of my thoughts that some problems can't be handled by criminalizing them. I mean, you can criminalize them and make us all feel better. It won't stop abortions. So I sort of take the positions that they should be safe, legal, and very rare. And I would be all for imposing a lot of restrictions on it. One, an abortion without notification of the father, absolutely forget about it. They should need father's consent for an abortion. They should require counseling to women on the fact that this is a human life that they are terminating. They should be made aware of options for adoption and other things. I believe in a long list of things that I believe would detour many, many women away from the act of abortion, and that we would save many, many lives that way. But I just don't think that driving it all underground is an appropriate solution. I think we found out with prohibition of alcohol in the United States just how smart that is, when there was rivers of gin, people dying of toxic gin, and just as many drunks practicing as there ever was outside of prohibition. So yeah, as a policy matter, I think we agree, Mike, in many ways. I also think that it does build a common bridge with religious groups, because I can only define my position as pro-life. If I have to put it in a nutshell, I'm absolutely pro-life. And I think we could connect with churches and human rights organizations, because if we're going to accept responsibility for what we're doing, we have to acknowledge what an incredibly gross violation of human rights it is to take a defenseless human being. In defenseless, in if there ever was a word meaning to the word defenseless, this is it. No fighting, no ability to defend yourself at all. And I really think that we need to take a very dim view of that and do everything we can to make sure that that happens as little as possible.
Yeah, I have to say, Paul, I find it morally on the same plane as killing young children. But both are defenseless. Neither can, could survive without.
Well, the left in America, the governor of the state that I live in, has already been talking about how do we kill them after they're born. And that's not an exaggeration. That's exactly what Ralph Northam was talking about, making the newly delivered infant comfortable, because we weren't competent enough to kill it in the womb. So we make it comfortable and figure out how to either let it die or happen after that. That's Auschwitz type.
It is. I remember some years ago now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 2 medical ethicists, I think a man and a woman, put out a paper advocating for women who've had their babies delivered to have, I think it was 2 months period in which they could have the medical profession kill the child, and the father having absolutely no say in the matter.
And let me emphasize that too. I mean, that is just horrific. But one of the biggest problems with the way we conduct abortion is the absolute, I don't even have a word for it, just the mindlessness about the idea that there are fathers out there who may be willing to care for those children and raise them, give them a loving home, and they're not even factored into the equation. We will kill the baby.
Sorry, Paul, go on.
Go ahead.
No, and of course, even if there isn't such a, if the father's not available or unwilling, there's certainly in the UK, there's a huge number of generally childless couples who would give their back teeth to have one of these children.
Absolutely, and we have them. I mean, the adoption business is very robust in the United States too, and it is just obscene what's happening. The carelessness that we approach abortion, whether you want it legal or illegal, the fact that we approach it with such a cavalier attitude, and now we have feminists out there bragging about their abortions.
Yes, as a feminist, 2 or 3 years ago, I had a speaking tour about my best abortions.
Yes. I remember that.
It really puts paid to the idea that feminism is about sisterhood, doesn't it? Because, as a mother to children who knows other mothers, and, obviously these days women are having babies later and later. And so the number of stories I know about women who've had miscarriage after stillbirth, and they've been through hell, and it's really, really been awful. And then you have feminists shouting their abortions. It's like they're not a sisterhood at all.
Well, it's a death cult. It's a death cult among many other things.
And I salute you, Mike. This stuff needs to be said. It needs to be said in men's issues platforms. The fact that we have so many people out there saying, well, until you could get pregnant, you shouldn't have anything to say. Oh, please, then in that case, until I get cancer, screw people with cancer. It's none of my business. This is just an absolutely barbaric attitude to think that as a man, I'm disqualified to talk about ending human lives without any reason whatsoever other than you're being inconvenienced by your own behavior. I'm not buying it. I think it should be talked about.
Yeah, exactly. It does need to be talked about and seriously talked about. And I think one of the biggest problems for me with the whole issue at the moment is the fact that the Overton window is so incredibly narrow, and pro-life voices don't get an opportunity to be heard at all, to the point where we have councils in the UK creating buffer zones where pro-life groups are not allowed to organise outside of abortion clinics. And what these groups do is they go and they hold prayer vigils and hand out leaflets, and they offer women financial support, therapy, and housing support if they're willing to change their minds. And they have women changing their minds, and then those women, thank God that they met those people and that they didn't kill their babies, and that they made a better decision than they were originally going to that clinic to make. But these groups are not allowed to do that anymore, and it's really sick.
Elizabeth, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think only a fairly short one. For the benefit of some viewers, I wonder if you could just quickly take us through what the Overton window is.
Well, the Overton window is the number or the range of sort of respectable opinions to put forward. So, when it comes to abortion, the range of acceptable opinions is that women should be able to make this choice, and you can either advocate for maybe, you know, our 24-week limit that we have in the UK now, or a later time limit. If you start talking about 12 weeks, that'll have you, you know, ejected from polite society. So that's the Overton window.
Right.
And we can say one thing: we have expanded the Overton window on men's issues. 10 years ago, I mean, you would see articles like we've been discussing, and maybe one or two people in the comments raising questions about it. And now you see these horribly misandric articles, and they either don't allow comments because they know what's coming.
The Guardian.
Or they have comments and they get slaughtered in them. So there's an example of the Overton window being expanded quite a bit. And I do think that MRAs should play their own role in expanding that discussion on abortion too. Whether the world wants to hear it or not, fathers matter and men matter.
Yeah, that's the other place that at the moment the Overton window is completely shut on fathers' experiences. I read an article maybe a year ago, and you know, this guy started off by saying, my partner had an abortion and it was her choice to make, and I fully support her making that decision. And then he went on to say, but I was devastated, you know, essentially. And I caught it on Twitter, and it was just this, you know, mess of feminists shouting, how dare you try to take away her choice, which he clearly had never tried to do. You know, he just wanted to talk about his experience, and that was not allowed. That was outside of the Overton window. It's horrendous.
Okay, I think we'll love to do a bit of editing of this, of one or two bits, but I think, does that take you to the final question, Elizabeth?
Yeah, okay. So I'd like to bring the conversation back to men and women in the real reasons to not get married. You write that life with modern women is nothing less than a battle for your soul. And elsewhere, you refer to the great big bitch machine that is our modern societies. As a woman, I know exactly what you mean. What the hell has happened to women, and how do we make women great again?
Well, we can send them to the 22 convention in Florida.
A great expense.
Somehow, I think making women great again is going to happen in a different environment. I think we have to start by making men great. Men get what they tolerate. And this is something, you know, the thing I hate most about feminism is that everything depends on the victim mentality. Their whole worldview depends on being put upon and oppressed historically and now. I mean, I read an article one time, a woman was complaining that they don't make smartphones that fit women's hands. I mean, it was just insane. And that this is somehow an element of the patriarchy. I hate to see men go down that path. And so what I encourage men, and what I insist on, as a matter of fact, because I don't listen to men whine. It's not good. It's not healthy to just whine. It's healthy to talk about problems, but constructively and from a position of understanding that you can reshape your life. You can make things different. I made a decision, I would say 25 years ago, that I wouldn't date a woman who couldn't find her purse when the check showed up. And the moment that I saw sex being used in as any kind of a weapon of manipulation, I'm like, see ya. I'm out of here. And lo and behold, I ended up in a long-term relationship going 18 years strong with somebody who doesn't act that way. Imagine that. Guys, find out what your values are. What do you believe about yourself? Where's your self-respect? Where do you draw it from? If you feel like you want to pull your hair out because no matter what you do, she's not happy, it's because you're trying too hard to make her happy. Her happiness is her job. Let her have it. And if she complains that you're not making her happy, say, of course I'm not making you happy. Nobody but you can make you happy. Now go make yourself happy. We really have to get men. This stuff happened. And I mean, I look at my father's generation, and my father was a rough guy, fought in 2 wars. He was a Golden Gloves boxer, had the scars to prove all this stuff. And he was part of a generation of men who watched feminism waltz in and take over governance and never lifted a finger to stop it. We asked for this stuff. We have to own that. I think as men in a society, we have to own that we allowed this stuff to happen and that it's going to keep happening until we put a stop to it. We finally have an American president that's willing to do things to put a stop to it. We finally, I would guess you have I think, does Boris Johnson identify as a feminist?
His spokesman,
Yes.
his spokesman at the last election said that he was. In fact, I think. Oh no, sorry, no, it was a leadership contest, wasn't it? And I think there were 8 contestants for the leadership, and 7 of them said that they were feminists, or their people said.
There was also a speech where Boris Johnson himself identified as a feminist, but he then went on to say something about thinking that men and women should be treated the same, and it was that bit that got the applause, not the announcement that he was a feminist. So,
Right.
Well, if it's men and women should be treated the same, he's definitely not a feminist if he believes in equal treatment.
Well, it's widely reported that the upcoming, in fact, imminent cabinet reshuffle is going to result in fewer women in the cabinet, and feminists are going to go batshit insane over that. And I look forward to it.
Well, the good news is that's not a far trip for them.
No, it's not.
They will get there very quickly. But I think to try to put it in a nutshell is that we will have women who fail as human beings as long as men value sex more than their self-respect.
Paul, I'd like to go back to the issue about whining, and I'm 100% on board with you on that one, that nobody wants to see men whining. Completely get that. But I don't know if you'd agree with me, but to my mind, the men's right movement, at least for the time I've been in it, which is about 10 years now, doesn't go in for whining. It goes in for rational arguments. And I'd just like to, I just had on my desk a book, and I think the narrative is very much going, not about whining, but about pointing out male disadvantage. And I'd like to recommend a book to the viewers. I don't know if you can see that. An absolutely outstanding book by a guy called William Collins, The Empathy Gap, Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Respect. And there's a number of testimonials on the back, and one of them I'd pay good money for if it related to me, but it doesn't. It's from Professor Janice Fiamengo. And she says, "This man is a master. I am in awe of his work." Now, how much money will I have to give her to get that for one of my books? I wonder.
Man, now I'm jealous. I got a great glowing review on her from her on my book, but I didn't get that. Janice?
she'll have to be struck off regarding men. But
one of the things that I love.
But it's 700 pages of the disadvantages men.
Facts.
Boy, yeah, absolute facts. It is just rock solid. Rock solid.
And that's not whining. When I say I don't want to hear men whine, I don't want to hear women whine either. I'm just not much for whining. But one of the things I loved at ICMI 19 was Sargon of Akkad's talk in pointing out that the men's rights movement isn't an ism. There's no ism here. No. There's no ideology here. It's simple information, truth, empirical evidence of our claims, and a challenge to the society to look at that. That's not whining.
No, of course. I mean, feminists are always trying to create meninism or masculinism. They're just, they're jokes.
And I hear from those guys every once in a while. I want nothing to do with anybody that wants an ism. They're absolutely nothing to do with it. When I'm talking about whining, I'm talking about guys that say, I can't believe she cheated on me. That's the 4th time.
Shouldn't laugh.
I don't want to hear him. You didn't pack your bags and leave the first time, then don't expect people to be an audience for this. You're self-destructing. It's not even her anymore, it's you. And that's what I love about the men's movement. We hold our own feet to the fire and the feet of our brothers and sisters to the fire, to be truthful, to be honest, to be empirical in our approach, and to have intellectual honesty. I don't think you can beat that. I think in that sense, the men's movement is the most remarkable movement ever.
And we're only going to get more powerful and influential, Paul. There's no doubt about that.
I believe so.
Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to wrap up with anything?
No, I mean, I think that's quite a lovely moment to end on. And I think in a positive and productive conversation. Yeah.
Paul, thank you so much for your time. It's really, really appreciated.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed this talk. Would love to do it again anytime.
Thank you, Paul.
Excellent. We'll hold you to that.